Boy, we have a big crowd. And of course, because we have a big crowd, the lights are out and we have a leak in the roof. And we'll see what else we can put together before long. So welcome to everyone. We're going to start out with the pledge and the four-way test. Cindy, come on up.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the four-way test. Of all the things we think, say, or do, number one, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Okay, thank you, Cindy. And inspiration, Greg Fishwick. We need a big flashlight up here.
Thank you, Judy. I found this, I can't cite the author, but I found it at Hilton Dave Moody's house on a coffee table book. Let go of pride. Let go of ego. Let go of opinions. Admit your errors and forgive the errors of others. This relinquishment will lead to calm and healing in your relationships. If that doesn't work, try small claims court.
Very good, thank you. So we are going to, Dawn is going to help me here. If you are a guest, would you raise your hand, or if you're a visiting Rotarian, we're going to pass the mic around, no speeches, but we just want to know your name, and that's it. Okay, and why you're visiting.
All right, hands up. Vanna is coming. I'm Mary Slater. I'm Team Life.
Marty Zotolla.
Catherine Wood. Jennifer Philippi. Kathy Krauss.
We're there.
Larry Miller.
Gilberto Antonio José Luis Mendoza de Paz. Gilbert.
From Ecuador. Elaine Hayden from Ecuador.
Link Philippine.
Patrick Sharp.
John Javon from Party Club.
Over there, nobody?
Yes, 47% on three. Jack creation.
Thank you, Dawn, and
Taylor Johnson.
we have twice as usual. Can you mute whoever that is, and so some interesting challenges, and we want to welcome the CEO of Asante back there. Hello, visiting us. This is when Howard used to be with us. He's with us today, so we hope you'll consider joining us. Okay, so we are going to not do announcements today because we want to get along with our service above self student, and then we're going to go right into our speaker, and then at the end we'll do announcements and sergeants. Okay, Lisa Looney, would you come on up? Today we have the pleasure to introduce our November Student Service Above Self winner from Grants Pass High School. And so I'm hoping they're on the Zoom.
Can you hear us, Lisa? Can you hear us? Yeah.
So after I say,
You say thank you very much, and I'm Roland. This is what I'd like to do. This is what I've done in high school. This is what we talk about your community service. I want to go to Harvard and be a brain surgeon. Yeah, and they want to know about your service and stuff, but we're frozen. It's been twice, so I've never had this happen before.
yeah.
Hello. That is weird because it is picking us up.
Mhm.
And it could be on their end, it could be in between, or it could be us.
Transcribe. No clue what that means.
Okay. 31.
Oh, you can hear us remotely. Great. So would you like us to get started? That's kind of a conundrum. You can hear us remotely, but not at the public house. Well, we're happy to present real quick because I know you've got a busy agenda with Mr. Zotolla. So we're happy to present to the remote people, and then you guys can, kind of proceed at the public house.
So, Mr. Sarver, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Just so you know, because we want to have the entire range of challenges today, the internet went down. And I had contacted our speakers and told them that this might happen, and of course, they're all happening today. But we're coming back, and I told them also that we're really a fun crowd and it's all gonna be fine, so back to Lisa.
Okay, Mr. Sarver, can I see you?
I can see you standing up there, but for some reason, I don't know why our camera's not working on our little laptop, but we can certainly hear you and we can present.
Okay, that's another challenge, but I just went over Ron's bio, and so I'll turn it over to you to kind of give it to us out of the darkness.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Last year, and I didn't know this young man, but last year he was one of our TAs in the counseling center. And the secretaries told me he had to take off for a week. And I said, what's he doing for a week during the school year? And they talked about this medical thing that he goes on, this trip. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And he was a junior last year. So, and I didn't know a ton about him other than, he's a soccer fan like I am, but he likes Man United, which is kind of a problem. But so I got to know him a little bit. And then I looked at his stuff this year, and he's an exceptional student. And I didn't know the depth and the breadth of all his community service. So I called him in a couple of days ago and said, hey, here's why I'm calling you in. I was thinking about nominating you. And he gave me a heads up on some of the other things he does. And I said, perfect. You're a great Rotary nominee. So I nominated him and said, okay, we'll Zoom next. I think I talked to him last week. I told him we would be Zooming today. And we're kind of Zooming today. So I'll let him talk a teeny bit about himself.
Yeah, so I would just like to say, thank you to everybody involved for the kind words and for the nomination. Let's see. Well, my volunteer service started back in my freshman year. The medical trip Mr. Sarver was talking about specifically. So I went to Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras, with my mother, who is a doctor. And we spent a week and a half there. We provided medical aid and some education help to a rural subsection of their community there without access to any sort of hospital or proper medical care. And since I've been back to Honduras twice, and I plan to return this year as well, or if that does not permit, I would like to look into going to the Dominican Republic with the same surgical group. In addition, I am a volunteer coach. I work with Oregon Football Academy, the soccer organization here. And I also peer tutor at the high school.
And what are you hoping to do for college?
Let's see, for college, I'm hoping to attend the University of Washington. I would love to study biology and maybe pursue a career in animal biology or something to do with conservation. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Do you have any questions? Anybody have any questions for Roland?
He's
No?
pretty articulate. Ask anything you want. He's pretty sharp.
He sounds it. How did he like his gifts?
I'm sorry?
How did he like his gifts?
Oh, he did. I just emailed you though. I gave him his helmet and then we were looking through the bag and it wasn't stacked. Nothing was stuffed in it. So I didn't know if it didn't get the stuff put in there because I had it in a cabinet in my office and it was empty. So I told him about the gifts.
It was empty?
Yes, ma'am. Sadly, I took it out of my cabinet this morning.
We'll make it up to you.
I know. No worries.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa.
you.
Guys, what else? Our apologies, but in fact, the students who get this prize or award is 4 times a year, and they get a big basket full of stuff, which except for today, and they also get a check for $750 to be spent however they like, and it's really a nice little boost. So, okay, next, I think Dawn is going to introduce our speakers. Thank goodness you're here, so we can actually see you. We don't have to make up what you look like.
All right. In case any of you didn't read your e-navigator, I'm going to read what was written about our speakers and what the program is, and then provide a couple of little personal things. So Kathy Krauss and Marty Zotolla are going to share their knowledge about world religions from their personal experiences, studies, and teaching. Kathy, who's traveled extensively to countries in the East, including India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Japan, will share her insights about Buddhism and other Eastern religions, while Marty, after years of studying and then teaching world religions, will share his insights related to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Kathy taught writing, literature, and world religions at Road Community College for more than 35 years. That's amazing. And her interest in religion led to a year of graduate work at the Theological Union in Berkeley. Yay, Berkeley. Marty taught honors English and coached at Grants Pass High School for most of his professional career. He was born and raised in Grants Pass with roots that stretch back to 1853. The next, I don't know, I think there's a little gin in this room. I don't need the kind you drink. Back to 1853 when James and Margaret Savage settled beside the Rogue River. And Marty, I was wondering, is that why it's Savage Rapids Dam? Is it after your family? Very cool. Mr. Zotolla has lived here almost his entire life, and I love what he wrote. He worked and learned here, experienced joy and sadness, had some success here and made mistakes here. More than anything, he's been able to love living in this valley and to love the people of the community. And all his life, he has wrestled with God, if there is a God, if God is. Our two presenters met when Marty enrolled in Kathy's World Religions class, and his interest grew so great that he took the class several more times before initially offering to be Kathy's assistant. Eventually, the two of them soon became academic colleagues and taught the class together. So during this program, we're going to be fortunate enough to learn about world religions, Eastern and Western, from the perspective of this dynamic duo. But I did kind of wanted to add a little extra personal magic. Marty Zotolla, my children would have called him Mr. Zotolla, was an amazing, amazing teacher. And I know from my son's experiences that the students at Grants Pass High were kind of fighting to have either Mr. Zotolla as teacher or coach or Mr. Owls. So his teaching is not forgotten, and my sons who are in their 50s still remember what a great teacher is. As for Kathy, I have a quick magic story too. Years ago, and it was Catherine who organized this trip, we ended up at Half Moon Bar Lodge. And one day, Kathy and I and 2 others decided to hike up to the Indigenous Vision Quest site. We're standing there in awe because it was a pretty amazing place when this Western tanager flew and lit on the very tip of the rock overlooking the river. And that was magic too. So please, magic people, come up. Round of applause.
Can everybody hear? I've got kind of a croaky voice today, so I hope I can make you hear me. And I'm gonna try to read this with my phone light. I wanted to start out telling you about another time I had a talk ready to give to a Rotary club. And in 1989 or so, my husband and I were driving home from California when our car broke down. And I told the gas station attendant I hoped he could get us going again because I was supposed to give a talk at a Rotary club. And when he found out that it was about world religions, what his response really startled me. He said he predicted in a couple 100 years we wouldn't have religions anymore and we'd be the better for it. So that we did get the car fixed and I did get this talk. And now that Marty and I are doing still another Rotary Club talk, it's quite a few years later, and I'm starting to think that maybe there has been a change in people's attitudes about religion. On a PBS NewsHour lately, I saw on the screen a 2-line statement that said 80% of Americans think that religion isn't as important in people's lives as it used to be. And that made me remember reading an article that called France a post-Christian nation. And that made me remember my daughter saying that she couldn't think of a single one of her friends who would want to see a movie that was being played here. It was about religion. And because of all that, I'm kind of fretting a little bit because at the same time I'm hearing all these comments about how religion isn't mattering as much to people these days. I'm also hearing horrifying statistics about the prevalence of depression and anxiety and suicide, especially among young people. And I can't help wondering if there's a connection. My thought has always been that when we have nothing bigger or higher or deeper or more substantial than our own puny little egos, we're left hanging over the abyss, and that can be terrifying. So while we do want to talk about religions today, I'm thinking maybe in part it's because we're hoping that in giving you a quick look at what these traditions have to offer, we might at the same time be making a case for why we want to keep them. As you heard in the introduction, my part of this talk is on the Eastern religions, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. And my first reaction in thinking about this was that they are really different from what we're used to. And some of the differences, seems to me the single most important difference, is that in the West, we think of religion in kind of dualistic terms. That we're here and there's a God out there, and we want some kind of connection, and we often pray for some kind of connection or transfer or transaction to take place, some kind of answer to our yearning and begging, please, can I be granted help of some kind, wisdom, strength, and infusion of love. I'll try to be worthy of that gift if you'll only grant me this spiritual sustenance. And in the East, Hinduism and Buddhism, Hindus and Buddhists are taught it's part of their birthright that they not only can have that spiritual essence, but that they already do have it. One of the primary teachings in Hinduism is that of Brahman Atman, and it's that sign there is Brahman is the big overarching Godhead, and Atman is the individual spark of that. The job of the seeker is to work on making the connection manifest so that eventually the person actually participates in that spiritual essence through years of long training in meditation. When we go deeply enough into the layers of our being, we come to a substrate, the teachings say, where we find the Godhead and Brahman, and our Atman part are identical. As the Hindu holy book, the Upanishads puts it, Tattvam Asi, thou art that. It's what we in the West call the mystical experience. And while it's infrequently achieved, Hindus teach that it's been a latent part of ourselves all along. And when that realization occurs, we reach a level of consciousness that's not usually acknowledged in the West. It's called Turiya. In the West, we're taught that we have three states of consciousness: waking consciousness, deep sleep, and dream sleep or REM sleep. In Hinduism, there are also those three, but they've added a fourth, Turiya. The word actually means fourth, and it's what happens or what's reached when all the levels of our being have been experienced, and we keep saying, neti, neti, not this, and finally we reach the level of perfect oneness with the divine. And all those ways that we have of connecting with that are called yogas. And it depending on whether you're more an intellectual seeker or a devotional type or whatever, there's a yoga for you, and it's what yokes you to the divine. That's what the word yoga means. The trick is, though, for the spiritual essence, the Atman, to arise, the ego has to completely disappear. There's no room for a separate ego in the path mapped out by these Eastern traditions. One of the best sources of help with this is the Hindu and Buddhist holy book, the Bhagavad Gita. It cautions that most human activity, good and bad, is tainted by ego involvement, and that such activity cannot clarify consciousness. Only selfless work purifies consciousness, because when there is no trace of ego involvement, new karma is not produced,
The mind is simply working out the karma that's already accumulated. That seems like a really encouraging teaching to me, to think that every time we refuse to let our egos hold forth, we're lessening a little bit the accumulation of a lifetime of me reactions to our experiences. And it brings us to the thought of one of the most refreshing ideas in Hindu mysticism, that of the original goodness. Since the self, the Atman, is the core of every personality, no one needs to acquire goodness or compassion. They're already there. All that is necessary is to remove the selfish habits that hide them. Because of these extravagant claims in Hindu and Buddhist cultures, I think it would be almost impossible to overstate how important working on the mind is. Virtually everything Eastern traditions care about seems rooted in some form of mind training. And maybe that's because where we in the West have traditionally assumed that matter is the primary material of the universe, in the East, the primary substance is consciousness. The famous Zen Buddhist rock gardens in Japan illustrate this dramatically. There's an expanse of raked white gravel forming a large area of undifferentiated sameness, punctuated here and there with large boulders, and it all suggests occasional bits of matter arising from unbroken consciousness. Different forms of mind training have been going on in the East for millennia, and starting with seemingly small but actually extremely important reasons for such training is the issue of trying to keep the mind free of what are considered dangerous mental habits. The more we let our minds go in harmful directions, the teachings say, the more likely we are to react in the same fashion when the next unpleasant or unfortunate event arises. And where Hinduism is so ancient that nobody can ever point to a founder, that's not the case with Buddhism. In fact, the Buddha was a pretty unforgettable character. He, as the same way Jesus was born out of the Jewish tradition and ended up being the figurehead of a huge religion, the same way the Buddha was born a Hindu and eventually started a religion entirely on his own terms. He's often called the world's greatest psychologist. The Buddha thought that he wanted to wake people up spiritually, and that's exactly what his name means, the awakened one. The teachings were memorable in part because they were often totally inconsistent. He might advise one person in a certain practice or view one day and then offer something not only different, but almost entirely antithetical to that the next day. And it's because he was such a keen observer and understander of human diversity that he knew that what would be the answer for one person wouldn't necessarily be for another. I've heard that he sometimes even said things that weren't literally true completely. It was along the lines of the way modern parents feel okay about encouraging their children to believe in Santa Claus, that it may not be factually be true, but it fills a certain need at a certain stage of development. But most people, most of the time, he cautioned every adult person to be extremely careful about this is hard to read, I'm sorry, extremely careful about the kinds of thought that he reminded people all that we are is the result of what we have thought. We are made of our thoughts, we're molded by our thoughts. As we think, so we become. And this leads to the little story that I wanted to tell you about as the very end of my part of the presentation. I have a friend who is a Zen Buddhist monk and who lives in a monastery near Shasta City in Northern California. And when I knew I'd be talking about Buddhism today, I thought I couldn't find a better source of insight into what a life devoted to the Buddhist practice might bring. I already knew quite a bit of what his life had been like because I've attended retreats there, learned to meditate there, and Marty and I have had him speak to our world religions classes. But just the other day, he told me about something I hadn't known before that I hope you'll find persuasive about the need to be constantly vigilant about the places we let our minds go. My friend, whose name is Daishin, said he'd been at the Abbey for 50 years now, and for 40 of those years, he's had a student in Oklahoma who had developed an interest in Buddhism and had sought out someone from Shasta Abbey to be his teacher. The unusual thing about the person from Oklahoma is that he had been on death row for all of those 40 years, with my friend serving as his advisor and mentor. They had kept in touch all that time by way of mail and telephone calls and even occasional visits. Years ago, the prisoner had been found guilty of some truly heinous crimes and was facing a death penalty, but he kept insisting he was not guilty of the crimes and had begun a long series of stays and appeals, which held off a final sentence until as recently as this past June. Finally, my friend Daishin at the Abbey got a message telling him that the student was to be executed, and he was asked if he could be present during the days just before and during that execution. Daishin did attend, and it's what we talked about on the phone a few days ago. In Buddhism, the state of mind one has just before death and during death is it's really important because it's a huge determinant in what the Buddhists believe in rebirth and afterlives, and it's a huge determinant in what direction the next life takes. And Daishin told me he was happy that he had been able to be there to help his student through the process, and was particularly happy about the student's state of mind in those last days. He said that he hadn't moved away from insisting on his own innocence, but that he seemed serene and accepting of the decision the authorities had made. The morning of the execution, he was strapped to a gurney, received the injection, and in under 5 minutes, he had died. It was quick and peaceful, and Daishin described it as a good death. When Daishin talked about being happy to have attended that event, I have to confess I didn't feel the same way. I'm happy I didn't have to attend. I'm happy I didn't have to be there. But I'm very glad that I have heard that story. It's something I'll think about when those last days close in on my life. And I'm grateful to my Zen Buddhist friend for giving me such an important reminder. And now on to Marty and his part, which is about the Western and Middle Eastern religions. And I'm sorry, I couldn't see this better.
Okay, that's up. Close to the mic. Yeah, Marty, get that mic real close. There you go. Or talk. The talk, let's see. Test your sound.
Hello? Hi. Kathy talked about taking phones out, set timers for 15 minutes. I'm gonna fly through this thing. Kathy talked about the decreasing numbers for religious people, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with the delusional John Lennon imaginings about no religion at all and no war. Ha ha ha. I laugh, ha ha ha. Like that would ever happen. No war. Something else that's funny is trying to deal with the Abrahamic religions in 15 minutes. Ha ha ha. Might as well try draining the Rogue River in one day with a bucket. Anyway, consider this. Even though we've all heard about religious wars that slaughtered so many and exploited so many and committed terrible atrocities against so many, how often do we consider the good done throughout the ages because of religion's influences? Good and generous acts performed by common folks, everyday people, individuals pretty much like us, acts that are never noticed, but if they were recorded like events in history books, would far outweigh the atrocious acts of war perpetrated because of some distorted view of God. Consider the good done by you folks, both individually and under the auspices of Rotary and its guiding principles and avowed mission, and multiply it by the billions of souls influenced by religion who did right through the eons, and you have more than enough good to offset the bad. Yet religion, and naturally by logical extension God, if there is a God, if God is, generally are viewed with disdain, disregard, and derision, and unfortunately too, often those disses are justified. Religion has earned rightfully a pretty bad reputation, but we shouldn't judge God, if there is a God, if God is, by people, because I'm pretty sure we'd all agree people have a tendency to muck things up. If that were not the case, organizations like Rotary would not exist to try to rectify some of the wrongs or inequalities or injustices perpetrated by people. Or at least the club wouldn't try to serve others in a way that could help improve lives and circumstances. Circumstances often the result of inequalities and injustices. Why would Rotary send someone halfway around the world, say, to build a medical clinic? Why? The never-ending question. Why? I digress a little. So Kathy and I thought initially that we would talk about the differences between exoteric and esoteric religious practices. But lately I've been wrestling more and more with just what religion is. I've always thought of it as necessarily being related to and founded on some belief in gods or God, if God is. I mean, to my knowledge, there's never been a culture that did not have some sort of religion or religious beliefs. But what constitutes religion? Yeah. But what constitutes religion? What is it? I need a definition. So I made one for myself, skeletal as it is. That should be on the second slide. Now going to the third slide.
Fine, stand fine.
Religions are human-made constructs that attempt to somehow corral and codify human activities or practices used to appease, worship, understand, and interact with deities, spirits, and God if there is a God, if God is. But anything can become a religion. If there are repetitious routines that become almost cultic and ceremonial, like saying a pledge, reciting a creed of beliefs, collecting money for fines, listening to a presentation, sharing a communal meal, and so on. And even though religion is most often associated with some deity or form of deity, a specific God need not be identified, because really anything can become a God. Anything can become an idol if it is somehow pursued as the end of life itself. Religion is also a binding together of people who share beliefs, share obligations, share values and ethics, and a sense of community, much like the folks in Rotary. Religious folks share recollections because remembering is an important way of loving and remembering to love. I mean, think about remembering special times with people you love, like a spouse, a dear friend, children, a parent. Remember events shared in a life, trips maybe, walks along a leaf-carpeted sidewalk, days sitting by the river, even moments of trials and sadness and loss. Remembering makes for commemoration and helps solidify loving relationships. Religions practice remembering to maintain unity and sustain love. People bind themselves to God through these acts too. Public readings of Bible narratives and Gospels and epistles, the rituals and ceremony of Jewish seders to mark Passover, and lighting menorah candles during Hanukkah, Muslim calls to prayer 5 times a day. These serve to bind people together, but these are obviously more religious in nature. Still, what is religion? And I am back to looking for a definition, which has been part of the grappling matches I've been engaged in lately. Well, I have my skeletal human construct definition, but I wanted one that had a little more authority, more than Merriam-Webster and more than I had myself. So taking a few things from the Hebrew Bible Old Testament and the New Testament too, and ideas that bend with the Quran as well, the more religious definition includes these, a conflation of ideas from the 3 Abrahamic traditions. According to Micah, a prophet from the Hebrew Bible Old Testament, the task of human life is to walk humbly with God, if God is. As he wrote, what does the Lord ask of you? To act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord. Other prophets emphasized obedience versus animal or cultic sacrifice, which most cultures practiced at that time, many sacrificing humans, often babies. But as Houston Smith summarized, the great contributions to our culture that came from the prophets were that individuals are responsible not only for their face-to-face dealings with others, but also for the social structures of their society. And he wrote, the future of any people depends in large part on the justice of its social order. Can we consider that as possibly helpful in our own time? Another common factor involves submission to God, if there is a God. But that doesn't mean to simply cede all personal control. It's more to accept that the world is not mine. I do not control the world. And at times I have to trust that something greater than me is at work in the universe. And that is an argument for faith, which is a key component to these 3 religions. But it doesn't mean to accept blindly anything said or written or sermonized. It is incumbent on individuals to consider the evidence, examine the evidence, and choose wisely. But it's also essential to know what can and can't be proven and fairly weigh that against the various considerations. One aspect of the Jewish tradition that is vital, in my opinion, is the idea of wrestling with God, if God is. Like Jacob at the river Jabbok was supposed to wrestle with all this stuff. We should wrestle with and debate about the ideas and precepts in the Bible and the Quran. We should even wrestle with the verity of God's existence, if God is. We need to wrestle with doubt, because faith that doesn't doubt is dead faith. And faith lies at the core of each of these Abrahamic traditions. And wrestling is the natural result of studying and learning and critical thinking. Because so much in the Abrahamic tradition of scriptures is not crystal clear. So much is actually kind of cloudy. And yet I digress again. So once more, what is religion? Yeah, that's later. So once again, what is religion? James in the New Testament declares, religion that God accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And then Matthew in his gospel says, when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So religion is helping others who are in need. But this also emphasizes that you should be humble about and not require any recognition. Eradicate ego involvement. As Kathy said about the Hindu narrative, or maybe in a slightly different way. Don't even let one hand know what the other is doing. But we all know there are times it's good for both hands to know what they're doing. And I'll bet all of you in here have at times given freely without seeking acknowledgement or even telling anyone what you did. So everyone in here has assuredly been religious in this respect. More importantly now, in light of Kathy's comment that she made to me about the prospect of life without religion seeming pretty dire or bleak or grim, I think the better question than what is religion is why is religion? First, I should share some actual information about the Abrahamic religions, since I think that's what I was expected to do more or less. The three Abrahamic religions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because out of Abraham came each of the founders of those religions. Stephen Prothero, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Ishmael, then Muhammad, Islam, Isaac to Jacob, Israel, the Israelites, Judaism, through David to Christ, Christianity. Stephen Prothero in God Is Not One states that all religions address a problem, seek a solution or goal, employ some techniques, and honor, revere, worship, and exemplars. This is finally the educational portion of this little show. It might be good to take notes just in case there's a quiz. Judaism, thank you. In Judaism, the problem is exile from Yahweh God. The goal or solution is to somehow return to God, to get back home, get back to the garden. Those boys. And the technique is through the law, remembering, ceremony, ethical living. The exemplars are the prophets and the rabbis. Christianity, problem is sin. The goal is salvation, and the technique is through faith in Christ and the atoning grace of his crucifixion. As Paul writes in Romans, the righteous will live by faith. He's really quoting an old Hebrew Bible Old Testament prophet named Habakkuk. The person who is righteous will live by his faithfulness. Faith is the key. But James says faith and works are necessary. And this is one of the issues that arises still these days between Protestants and Catholics. Protestants say grace alone, faith alone. Catholics say, well, there should be some works along with it. Martin Luther got in trouble for this. Jan Hus and Jerome of Prague got killed because they thought about this. The basis of the Reformation. And the exemplars of saints. Islam, the problem is pride, hubris, self-idolatry, thinking that we are self-sufficient, that we can be self-sufficient, but we don't need God. The solution is simply submission to Allah, having trust and faith in Allah God. And the technique is through the orthodoxy belief Allah is the God, the only God, and Muhammad is his messenger. And then the orthopraxy is the 5 pillars. If you recite the Shahada and sincerely mean it in your heart, you become a Muslim. That's what I've been told. And then the other 4, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage, if you can afford it, are all part of the practices as well. Islam means to surrender to God. But embedded in the name Islam is the idea that by submitting to Allah, you experience the peace of Allah as well. And even though humans were created with natural desires, they're not bad. It's not a battle of flesh against spirit, because God made those and willed them to be good. It's just a matter of practicing them gratefully and in moderation, and not allowing something to become an idol. The individual has responsibility, and love, as implied by the golden rule, for others is one of those responsibilities. Now we get to the bugger about Islam, jihad. And we know this is the holy war, the fighting and strife. But there are 2 types of jihad. The greater jihad is that struggle, that internal conflict in people having to fight against the submission to God, because we want to control our lives. We want to believe we're in control. And submitting becomes a challenge. That's the greater jihad. The lesser jihad is the fighting that goes on, the terrorist acts that go on, that are terribly, terribly skewed, perverted in my estimation. If you read the Quran, you know that kind of fighting is not supposed to go on. Peace is supposed to be offered. Innocents are not supposed to be killed. It's only supposed to be if the religion is being somehow oppressed or suppressed by an enemy. Okay, so what? What's the so what about all this? What's the big deal? And now we get to the why religion. And we begin to maybe assuage some of Kathy's anxieties about the prospects of life without religion. In the Abrahamics, there's one common thread besides monotheism, and that's love. Love, as in the golden rule, and all its various manifestations, which occurs in almost every culture. Love is in love your neighbor as yourself, the second great commandment. And to use a Beatles line, love is all you need, in a slightly different context. But we all know love is sometimes painful and hard, and sometimes we have to do things we don't really want to, just because we know it will be best for someone. Tough love. If you've been a parent, you probably have some clue about that. Still, as unrealistic and altruistic and idealistic as it is, and maybe as delusional as Lennon's lyrics, how nice would it be if we could look at folks, as strangers even, someone like the woman who begs at the bottom of the post office steps, or a clerk at a cash register who can't figure out the code for the asparagus spears, or the UPS person who just backed over your newly planted azalea bush, or just someone sitting across from you here at Rotary and say, and truly mean it for all it entails, I love you. If we could do that, things would be better in many ways. But I digress. And the clock is ticking. So what does all this come to? It means we all have a responsibility. The individual has a responsibility to the community has a responsibility to the individual. This concept is supported in each of the Abrahamic traditions and their scriptures. Love your neighbor. In doing so, you help the community. In the Quran, give charity so that everybody's taken care of. What is our responsibility, though, and to what community? Now, my question is this. Responsibilities will be rewarded with communal rewards that benefit everyone. Doesn't Rotary fit this too? Doesn't Rotary do what it can to be responsible to the community, to communities, and to accomplish that? Isn't it necessary for Rotarians to be responsible individually? Therefore, the there are a lot of religious people here, and probably you aren't even aware of it. That's good. That helps to take care of Kathy's worries. And I say thank you and thank God and bless you for it. Okay, but what must we all do? I'm almost done. Free will, God's gift to humans, emphasized in each of the scriptures for the Abrahamic traditions, is what separates humans from animals. Reason, use the mind, use intelligence. Jesus said, love with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. The use of reason and intelligence is required. Critical thinking is requisite. Make sure you respect other people's rights to free will, so they will respect your rights to free will. And finally, Pascal in his Pensées says, man is but a reed, but is a thinking reed. Let us endeavor then to think well. This is the principle of morality. And now, the answer to why religion. If man had never been corrupted, he would enjoy in his innocence both truth and happiness with assurance. And if man had never been anything more than a corrupted being, he would have no idea of truth or of beatitude. But unhappy as we are, and more than if there were no grandeur in our condition, we have an idea of happiness, and we cannot reach it. We feel an image of the truth and possess but falsehood, incapable of absolute ignorance and a certain knowledge, so manifest is it that we have been in a degree of perfection from which we are fallen. And this is why we try to get back to the garden. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was tremendous. And we're already at 1 o'clock. So any of you people who need to take off, feel free to go ahead. We're going to forego questions and answers and ask Kathy and Marty to stay after the meeting. And Dawn, would you be happy to go right into sergeants? And then we'll probably run over 5 to 10 minutes today. Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. There's clearly an appetite for this information, and now I'm going to have to sign up to take world religions at RCC. So
I feel like we were in the middle of some kind of a speed date. It was wonderful. It was so much to absorb. I think we should all take the class. All right, just very quickly, what we have on the table are sticky notes. And I think particularly after listening to both Kathy and Marty, if you can, write something on there that makes you feel grateful during a time of year when we need to be reminded that every day there's something to be grateful for. Then take that sticky note home and put it somewhere in your house, and on a day where you feel, oh, I'm so sad, just remember you have reasons to be grateful. So that's what you can do. And it can be anything, you know, be glad that we're on the planet that is in this solar system, or that your dog learned to sit. So, because we don't have any time, if you feel generous, go ahead and put some money on the table. And now how about cards? The cards? Yes.
I want to congratulate you for the wonderful award last night.
oh,
Doug is the epitome. All right, and I think who we will have draw the cards are the people who have come the furthest distance. All right, look at your card.
thanks again. That was just terrific. We have mood lighting and everything. And next week we'll be off and we'll be back the following week with our annual business meeting. And Dawn says everybody drink two espressos before that meeting. Business meeting. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And Kathy and Marty stay behind and we'll visit with you. Okay. Have a good week, everyone. Hit the bell.